of sin is something that I think needs a lot of exploration and a lot of study. And inshallah, in this night and maybe the next session, I will bring about a few very brief discussions about this notion. Please recite the salawat. The notion of sin, as you know, is something very clear. Everybody knows that doing anything that is against religion or against reason is considered to be a sin. But when we refer to the Quran, to the Holy Quran, we see that there are many different terms that are used for expressing the same notion. We don't see that Quran is always using the same word for this notion. We see a lot of different terms and words that are being used to express the same common notion. One of the most common of these terms is ithm. And with the term that is derived from this word has been repeated about 45 times in Holy Quran. For example, in Surah Baqarah we have وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. When they ask you about wine and gambling, tell them that there is a big sin in them. But we have other words and other terms that all of them refer to the same meaning of doing something which is against religion. Among them are osyan or dhanb. Dhanb is also very common. We have, I think we have 38 times in Quran the term dhanb. We have hanf, hub, junah, jurm, jarirah, zalal, su. All of these terms, when are translated into English, they are translated into the term sin. But Quran has used many different terms for this. I think even having an independent study on the terms that are being used for the notion of sin is very constructive. Because when we refer to these terms, we see that these terms are in two types. Some of these terms, that all of them are being translated into the term sin in English, refer to the origin of the sin. And some of them refer to the consequence of the sins. So, paying attention to the meaning of these things, for example, the term osyan. When the term osyan is used, it is referring to the origin of the sin, which can be because of arrogance and not being obedient towards to the Lord and to Allah the Almighty. Or the term ithm, literally ithm means being slow or delay in something. This is the literal meaning of ithm. And when this word is used for sin, we can understand that it wants to say something that is, sin has a very bad consequence. That is, it delays us in our journey towards perfection, or it delays us in achieving God's mercy or God's blessing. And the term dhanb, I just bring these terms as an example because we don't have time to consider all of these terms. Dhanb, literally, it means sequel, something that comes behind. This term can have the meaning of a very general rule, that is, all the sins have a consequence that it will certainly come after that sin. And the consequences of sins, which is my main discussion tonight, is something that I think is very important, because one of the best ways when we want to live and abandon all the sins behind, it is very important to pay attention to the consequences of the sins. And the scholars, when they talk about the ways that we can do in order to avoid sins, they say one of the best things is to pay attention to the consequences that sin might have. As a general certain rule, we know, according to what we understand from Quran and Hadith, is that committing sin, has very bad consequences in our lives. Not only in the hereafter, but also in our worldly life. It is not the case that sin is something which is which is an independent action in an independent part of our life that doesn't have any relation to what has passed and what is coming in the future. This is wrong, because sin is totally related to what we have done, and it directly or indirectly has effects on the future of our lives. We have a lot of proofs in Quran and Hadith about this. I bring, for example, this ayah that says, وَذَرُوا ظَاهِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَبَاطِنَهُ إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَكْسِبُونَ الْإِثْمَ سَيُجْزَوْنَ بِمَا كَانُوا يَقْتَرِفُونَ. Leave or abandon all the sins, apparent sins and private sins. Those people who gain sins or those people who commit sins will be punished. In this verse, it doesn't say that this punishment will be in this world or in the other world. It is talking about just a general meaning of punishment, that it includes the punishment that might happen in this world and of course in the other world. And another verse that I think is more clear in this issue is verse number 41 of Surah Rum. It says, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس ليذيقهم بعض الذي عملوا لعلهم يرجعون. Means corruption has appeared in the land and the sea because of the sins that people have done, have committed. And God wants to taste them some of the consequences of the actions that they have done. Maybe they will return. This ayah clearly talks about that every evil action in every level has some destructive effect on the society and on the person. This is a certain Quranic principle that every sin has some bad effects in our life. And I think explaining this would not be very difficult, because when we look at the universe, this material life, we see that everything is totally linked together. We are living in a coherent system, a system which is very consistent. Every part of this world is greatly linked and related to the other part. For example, when someone pollutes the air, he cannot say that, oh, I'm polluting the air, and it doesn't have any relation to people who are living on the earth. Everybody knows that this is totally wrong. Or when somebody is polluting the environment or the sea, it will certainly have some direct or indirect effects on the lives of people who are living in the land. This is the system of the universe, which is a very coherent system, and every part of this system is linked to the other parts. The same model and the same example is completely true about our own life. When we are talking about the human's life, we are talking about a coherent system, that every part and every aspect of this system is related to the other aspects of that of the same system. For example, what we have done in what we do today has roots in what we have done yesterday, and of course will have some effects in what will happen for us tomorrow. I said this preface just to say that what is the secret of putting so much emphasis in Islam in abandoning the sin, and why is everything in Islam and about human perfection is related to this general notion of abandoning the sin. And the secret, according to what I said, I think is very clear. The secret would be that everything that we do has an action in our life, has an effect in our destiny, and has an effect in our fate. It would work as an obstacle for our perfection, which is the goal of life, which is the goal of creation. We have been created in order to achieve perfection. And when we want to achieve this perfection, there are some obstacles. If we want to bring one term for all these obstacles, that term would be the term sin. And this is the secret of all the emphasis which has been made in order to abandon all the sins or leaving all the sins behind. Indeed, someone who is committing a sin is breaking a natural law. Just the same as breaking the natural law in the world has some bad effects in other parts, the same thing happens about our own lives. Of course, there is a worse thing about the sins, that it is not limited to this worldly life. We believe that these consequences that are happening will be continued and will be repeated very worse in the hereafter. Anyway, there is a point here that the sins are not all the same, and there are different levels for the sins, and there are different consequences for different sins. And when we look at the sins, it is very good to pay attention to these differences. Some of the sins have a very quick consequence, like oppressing other people. Is one of the things that has been said in some hadiths, that it has a very quick consequence. We see this consequence in this world and also in the other world. But what sin has what consequence is something that we cannot know by ourselves. It is something that is completely behind our experience, and we should know that only by referring to infallible people who know things from unseen world. This is not something that we can experience ourselves. If I want to introduce a source for my dear brothers and sisters who want to study more about the consequences of sin, volume number 70 of Bahar al-Anwar, there is a chapter in that book which is named Al-Dhunub wa Atharaha. In that book, the late Allama Majlisi has a very comprehensive and a very broad discussion about the consequences of the sins. And he brings a lot of hadith about the sins, and he says that sin has that effect, and that sin has the other effect. And there are lots of illumination in that book. I recommend this book to all my friends. So because we have not time to consider all the things one by one, I just, in this part of my speech, I would like to talk about a few very general consequences of the sin. What are the general consequences? When somebody commits a sin, what is the result in general, not one by one? Because we have a lot of hadiths about considering the sins one by one, but because we don't have time to talk about that part, I just talk about the general consequences of the sin here. Please recite the salawat and I will continue, inshallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Okay, the first, and I think one of the most dangerous consequences of the sin that we can talk about it is that every sin has a bad effect in our understanding power. It works as an obstacle for understanding. You know, it is not the case that when we have a lot of information or we have a lot of data, this doesn't necessarily mean that we have a great understanding. Because there are lots of people who know a lot of things, but they cannot make the greatest answer for the questions that happen in their lives. In Surah An'am, it says, وَلَكِنْ قَسَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَزَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ وَكَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. He talks about some unbelievers. He says their hearts became so hard, and Satan made up what they were doing. Although what they were doing was wrong, but they thought that whatever they were doing was correct. They had lost their power to understand the badness or the wrongness of their activities. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, in a very beautiful, or we can say an amazing hadith, says that it is, I think this is very nice. If people please pay attention to this very nice hadith. He says, إذا أذنب الرجل خرج في قلبه نكتة سوداء فإن تاب انمحت وإن زادت حتى تغلب على قلبه فلا يفلح بعدها أبدا. When a man commits a sin, a dark stain appears on his heart. When a person on his or her heart, if he repents, that dark stain would be removed. But if he continues committing sins, that dark stain will become bigger and bigger until the time that it takes all over his heart. And at this situation, which is very dangerous, that person would never see happiness, would never achieve happiness. Means there is no hope for him anymore, because he has lost the source of knowledge and the source of understanding. And this lack of source of knowledge is due to the activities that he has done in advance. Understanding is like a light, something which must illuminate our inner understanding. And this light becomes less and less by committing sins in general. And the other consequence, which is very famous, and I think we have heard a lot